Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. When Joe Biden and Democrats were able to pass their $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill, there was some news that tax reform might be Joe Biden's next big legislative goal. And we talked last week about what is expected to be in that tax reform plan. We talked with Bill Scher about the political feasibility, remembering that there are many Democrats who don't necessarily support all aspects of what Joe Biden wants to do from the standpoint of tax reform. But now it looks like it may not actually be tax reform that Joe Biden and his administration tackle next. There's a report from the Associated Press that it may be a very large, a $3 trillion, I guess we're calling it an infrastructure package, but it's really like an infrastructure schools and families package. And Joe Biden reportedly Monday met with Senate Democrats to start laying the groundwork for what would be a spending package that would deal with many aspects of American infrastructure that are sadly outdated. We've needed like real, I don't mean you drive by and that stretch of road near your house is under construction for 2 years and it's never really clear what they're doing, but eventually it gets done. And I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about major repair and replacement of significant American infrastructure. We're talking about new development of roads. We're talking about refreshing hospital infrastructure, green energy systems, a lot of these different things. And reportedly, this is exactly what Joe Biden is looking at next. $3 trillion in total. And it will include money for schools. It will include money for families. And it would be divided up. Could be a third. Again, this is all early, but it looks like it could be about $1 trillion for roads, bridges, rail lines, electrical vehicle charging stations, and a cellular network. And the idea would be start pushing towards clean energy, but do it in an economically competitive way, which is what we've been saying for all this time. The idea is not necessarily to take things out of the market, but it's let's have fair markets where we're not subsidizing the wrong things. The second piece of it, which is the school piece, would include investments in workers by providing free community college, universal pre-K, pre-kindergarten, and paid family leave, another aspect that we've been talking about for a while, which many on the right see as, quote, handouts. Remember, it's our tax money that's then being used for programs. To call them handouts is wrong fundamentally, but it also ignores that when you're doing something that allows people to be more economically productive, it should fit under the umbrella of what the so-called free enterprise people would also want. Now, that $3 trillion number is obviously a number that is going to lead to the predictable and regular refrains from the right. And I think that hopefully Democrats will realize we're not going to get votes from Republicans anyway. So let's not care about the fact that they're going to talk about we don't have the money. Where's the money going to come from, et cetera, et cetera. They're going to do that regardless. They would do it if it was $2 trillion. They did it with $800 billion when it was Barack Obama's spending program. They're going to do it regardless. So hopefully that's not something that is going to be affecting the way that Democrats go about this. And fundamentally, as I said, when Donald Trump lost, and remember, we knew that on November 8th of 2020, we didn't have to wait until January 20th to know that. I said these 2 years will be a test in two ways. One, can Republicans obstruct everything and still get themselves reelected? The answer may be yes. And we'll actually talk later today about how even though every Republican voted against COVID stimulus a few weeks ago, 1/3 of Republican voters think that their Republican elected officials voted for COVID stimulus. So they may be able to obstruct and not get punished by their voters because their voters are so clueless. That's number one. But number two, It's a test of what can you get done when you have a 2-year period with the White House, the House, and the Senate. We've seen these periods before. The infrastructure spending needs to happen. It's been necessary for decades. We are able to count on 0 Republican senators to vote for it. Their efforts will be obstruction because ultimately they are cult members. They turned over the party to Donald Trump when it became clear that Trump had the momentum. And even if privately they were opposed to what Trump was doing, they stood aside, I guess, because they wanted to get their judges done or whatever the case may be. And I know that one of the talking points they may come up with, and unfortunately, this one resonates even with some in my audience, will be $3 trillion for all of this different stuff. Why can't we just separate it out and do individual bills, up and down votes on each of these elements? And then it would be clearer what people are in favor of or against, because you can always have Republicans saying, well, I'm not against doing some of this stuff, but we can't do all of it because of item number 1 and item number 7 and 20. Those are pork or those are bad or whatever the case may be. What you have to remember is that bills typically need 60 votes, but you can get around that through the budget reconciliation process. But you're limited in how many times you can use that process. Once we know, and we know, that Republicans will not actually negotiate in good faith, they'll find, if you change how you do the bill, they'll find new ways to oppose it. What you have to understand is that reconciliation and doing this with 50 votes plus Kamala is probably the only way you get it done. If you separate this out into 4 or 8 or 12 different bills, Republicans will then just find ways to delay each individual bill. They might use different justifications or the same one. The only way you really have a shot at getting this done is by doing it all together in what's called an omnibus bill and passing it through budget reconciliation. So ultimately, they would say, Republicans, oh, break it up and then we'll do individual votes on the merits of each one of these. Then they would just obstruct and use delay tactics to make sure that as few of those things actually get a vote in the first place, and then they would still vote against it in the end. So I do think it's probably more politically feasible right now for Biden to do this than the tax stuff. That's a political feasibility calculation. I think either way, he's going to be doing it with literally 0 Republican support. If you think some Republicans might vote for such a spending bill, infrastructure bill, let me know. And specifically, let me know who, because I just don't see it. There is currently a Senator Kennedy in the Senate, and he's actually named John Kennedy, but he's a Republican. He is not related to the well-known Kennedys of Democratic Party fame. And in the wake of multiple major mass shootings in the last week, Senator Kennedy has been doing the rounds to equate guns to cars, insisting that, listen, we don't ban cars because sometimes people die in car accidents. We don't ban cars because sometimes people drive drunk. And this could not be a sillier analogy. And we're going to talk about why in a moment. But understand that at a top level, even comparing cars and guns is fraught because of their intended purposes. Cars were never designed to kill people or animals or maim them. Yes, a car can be misused as a weapon, but it wasn't invented for that. Guns were invented to kill or maim people or animals, and sometimes to threaten people with the fear of doing that. Yes, guns can be used for target practice. That's not what they were invented for. Most people don't own guns merely for target practice. Most car-related deaths are accidents. Most gun-related deaths are deliberate, homicides and suicides. There are gun accidents as well, okay? So the comparison at a base level makes no sense. Senator John Kennedy and some others don't care or don't know. Here is John Kennedy at a congressional hearing earlier this week saying, we have lots of drunk driving deaths. We don't ban sober drivers from driving.
But I do think we ought to keep this in perspective. What has happened in the last few days, what's happened in the last years is, of course, tragic. And I'm not trying to perfectly equate these two, but we have a lot of drunk drivers in America that kill a lot of people. We ought to try to combat that too. But I think what many folks on my side of the aisle are saying is that the answer is not to get rid of all sober drivers. The answer is to concentrate on the problem.
I guess Senator Kennedy really liked this analogy because then he appeared on Fox News and made a similar car-related analogy to guns during an interview with Fox and Friends host Brian Kilmeade yesterday morning.
But you don't stop drunk drivers by getting rid of all sober drivers, which is what many of my Democratic friends want to do with respect to the Second Amendment. In my judgment, we do not need more gun control. We need more idiot control.
So part of the problem with saying that this is about idiot control, so therefore don't do anything about guns, is that it's too easy for idiots in the U.S. to get guns in the first place. And there's too many idiots in the United States. But the analogy to vehicles is really a terrible one because we already regulate vehicles way more than we regulate getting guns. John Kennedy says, let's not go crazy with cars like some want to do with guns because that would be bad. Actually, we do much more with drivers and vehicles already. To get a driver's license in the first place, in most states, you need to pass a written test, have a certain number of practice hours, pass a driving test, renew the license periodically. Sometimes that includes an eye exam. If you get too many tickets, you lose your license. If you don't pay tickets, you can lose your license. In most states, the car has to be insured. In most states, you need to have the car inspected yearly for safety. Depending on the age of the car, there would be an emissions test to see if it's roadworthy based on modern emission standards. If you drive drunk, you can use your license or even go to prison. It's not, no one is suggesting. He says, let's not do with cars what we do with what Democrats want to do with guns. In reality, it's Republicans who don't even want to do with guns what we already do with cars and drivers. I have many Democratic and left-leaning friends who own firearms. They all want universal background checks, mandatory waiting period to get a gun, limits on certain types of weapons, but arguably, just as importantly, limits on certain ammunition purchases, mandatory relicensing and testing, and mandatory gun insurance. We have a Second Amendment. I'm not disputing that. None of my left-leaning gun owner friends are disputing that. What we're disputing is that we don't even make it as difficult to get a gun as we make it to get a driver's license. And that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And a lot of this stuff is actually not controversial. Universal background checks, it ebbs and flows over time. But it's overwhelmingly popular with the American people. In the wake of the Sandy Hook shooting, it was like 88 to 90% support. Republicans just said no. It was a non-starter with Republicans. A lot of this isn't controversial with the American people, and it is a designed controversy by the NRA and other groups because they just want to sell guns. Always the threat of someone taking your gun is a great way to get people to go and buy guns before they make them illegal, right? This is how the NRA sells guns. And from the standpoint of elections, these are often, for the right, great issues for raising money. So terrible analogy, cars and guns, doesn't make any sense. Friday, March 26th, one-day membership special. We're almost there. We had a pretty poor month in February from the standpoint of memberships, a lot of cancellations because of what's going on economically. So we're doing a vaccine-themed membership blowout on Friday. If you want to get the instructions for how to take advantage of it, just get on my mailing list at joinpakman.com. Friday morning, you'll get an email and you'll be able to sign up at a huge discount. It's a beautiful thing. What if you could read 10 books in just one sitting? That's exactly what one of my favorite apps lets you do. It's called Blinkist, and what they do is take thousands of popular nonfiction books. They condense them down into text or audio that you can consume in 15 minutes. Blinkist makes sure that you're getting all of the important core insights from each book. So it's perfect for exploring a book you otherwise wouldn't have time for. If there's a full book you're thinking about buying, you can use Blinkist to get a sample first. Just think how much you can enrich yourself by being able to soak up an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month, and you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video. Remember that the David Pakman Show is mostly funded by listeners and viewers like you through the membership program at joinpakman.com, and it comes with the great benefit of an extra show every day. We do an additional show every single day for our members called the Bonus Show, world famous, Malaysia. The Bonus Show is huge in Malaysia. Sign up at joinpakman.com. So we've been covering and talking about these tragic major mass shootings over the last week in the United States. One of them took place in Colorado, and as if we needed any kind of reminder about the pernicious and depraved nature of the NRA, the National Rifle Association, consider that the NRA bragged that it helped block a ban on AR-15s and high-capacity magazines in Boulder, Colorado, just days before a shooter with exactly that type of firearm killed 10 people in Boulder at a grocery store. Think about that. The NRA bragging about that. And after the shooting, the NRA actually tweeted a defense of the Second Amendment. If you can imagine anything more crass and poorly timed, although maybe for them, it's exactly the right time to tweet this stuff, saying, quote, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." They are bragging about their role in blocking a Boulder, Colorado ban on the exact type of weapon that 6 days later was used for the shooting. And the NRA tweeted about a decision made in Boulder, quote, "A Colorado judge gave law-abiding gun owners something to celebrate. He ruled that the city of Boulder's ban on commonly used AR-15s and 10-plus round magazines was preempted by state law and struck them down." This was a ban passed by the Boulder City Council unanimously in 2018. They passed in 2018 an assault weapons ban and a high-capacity magazine ban after the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas school shooting in Parkland, Florida. It has gone through appeals and this fight, and now the NRA celebrates, we got them back, the AR-15s. And then 6 days later, one is used in Boulder, Colorado to kill 10 people. And what we have to remember and understand is, I mean, listen, first of all, there is no more depraved and backwards organization in the U.S. than the National Rifle Association, maybe the Republican Party, but one of the most depraved and backwards organizations. But you have to understand that the NRA is a business lobby, okay? Who are the customers of the NRA? It's not the gun owners, it's the gun manufacturers. And the gun manufacturers make money by selling guns. Democratic presidents help to sell guns because the NRA will claim that these Democrats are going to come and take your guns. Under Barack Obama, under the threats from the NRA, under the announcements from the NRA that Barack Obama was a threat to your gun ownership, we saw record gun sales. Under Donald Trump, who was not caricatured as the president that will take your guns, gun sales actually declined. The other aspect of this, and this is, it's just a reality. Mass shootings also sell guns for two reasons. Number one, the NRA comes in and says, look at how dangerous the world is out there, partially because the NRA has been so successful. It's really dangerous out there. You need guns. And then so people go and then they buy more guns. And then, of course, mass shootings also sell guns because after the mass shooting, groups like the NRA and other gun rights groups will say, this is not the time for Democrats to come take your guns, which they want to do. which perpetuates people wanting to go and stockpile even more firearms and ammunition. So as I said earlier today, we have a Second Amendment. I don't dispute that. My left-leaning, gun-owning friends don't dispute that. Many of us on the left have actually armed ourselves during the pandemic, partially for fears that, if these supply lines for, okay, toilet paper, but maybe more critically, other items, medical elements, food, whatever. If the supply lines are interrupted for longer periods of time, many on the left saying, I don't want the right wingers to be the only ones with the firearms. So this is not about contesting that there's a Second Amendment or whatever. This is about the pernicious and depraved nature of groups like the NRA, whose answer is always more guns. Their primary thing is, let's prevent bans on any types of firearms. And then their secondary thing is, if it's safe out there, we say it's safe because of guns. If it's dangerous out there, we say, well, you need more guns. If there's a Democratic president, they're coming for your guns, so you should get them now. The answer is always more guns for the NRA. And it's hard to imagine at this point a more immoral organization. There probably are some, but I'm struggling to think of them. In January, we did a segment about a focus group that pollster and researcher Frank Luntz did with Trumpists about their media consumption and how they end up believing things about the election. And what we found out was not particularly surprising. A lot of Fox News, a lot of Newsmax, a lot of OAN. It was very eye-opening. Frank Luntz did another great focus group a few days ago with anti-vaccine Trumpists. These are Trumpists who are hesitant to get the coronavirus vaccine. And we're going to look at some clips here. But the big takeaway is that our suspicions about anti-vaccine Republicans and Trumpists appear to basically be correct, which is that a full year of disinformation from Trump, downplaying the pandemic, downplaying its severity, that's a big part of why Trumpists and Republicans now, in great proportion, do not plan to get the coronavirus vaccine. So let's get right into it with the first clip, then we'll talk about it.
When I say COVID-19 vaccine, Adam, what do you think of first?
A miracle, albeit suspicious.
Lauren.
Unsure. Too many questions.
Patrick.
Rushed.
Doug from California.
Experimental.
Aaron.
Impressive but hesitant.
Marie.
Scary, not knowing the long-term side effects.
Chad.
Long-term side effects unknown.
Matthew.
Experimental and unknown how it will affect long-term.
David from Texas.
Long-term side effects.
Diane from Ohio.
Unproven.
Lisa.
Efficacy unknown.
So these responses about the vaccine range from the suspicious to the completely debunked talking points. For example, unproven and efficacy unknown, for example. It's quite the opposite. The phase 3 trials of these vaccines prove that these are some of the most effective vaccines ever developed by humans or by anybody. I don't know how many vaccines have been developed by animals, but these are some of the most successful vaccines and effective ones ever developed. Huge efficacy at preventing symptomatic illness, period, and almost perfect at preventing serious illness. We know that. That's not an unknown quantity. They just don't know. Rushed. We've gone over this many times. The mRNA platform under development for decades, specifically so that when you have a need for a specific vaccine, it's a faster process. It wasn't rushed. This is how long it takes to develop mRNA vaccines. Possible long-term side effects. You can always say that about any vaccine at any time. The polio vaccine was developed in 1955. That's 66 years ago. One could say, how do we know side effects don't start at the 67-year mark? What we know about vaccines and how they work, this idea of some future effect is not a concern based on all of the best medical science. So then they get into, where do these ideas come from? It's remarkable, but it's also pretty predictable.
Well, Frank, can I just say that it's all very logical. Like I look at this logically. There's no, craziness of because I think one way politically that I can't look at logic and reason. And I think what you said very kind of cavalierly about so what that the pharmaceuticals let the results out 5 days after the election. And to me, that's a big so what. It makes you doubt a little bit of the motives and the politicization of science. So if you really want us to trust the science, I think politics has to be taken out of it.
And also, if we could be told that by being vaccinated, things would get back to normal again.
And they don't even say
and that happened, but that's not happening.
No.
Things
Still wear masks.
Down.
Yep.
Right.
Still masks. Don't get together with family. It
Biden
doesn't even
said the
matter
other
that you're
night,
vaccinated.
oh, you could have a small gathering by 4th of July.
Maybe.
Small
maybe.
gathering, maybe. What
Maybe
it,
if we
4
behave.
people? Yeah,
If we
4
behave.
people and a few hot dogs. I mean, that's to me, if everyone's getting vaccinated, we got to move on.
And what you just saw was what happens when politics gets put in the middle of this. It's just got to come out somehow. I think that is going to be key to all of this. That it
And
just
ask yourself who put the politics there? Which
But
side had a
media.
benefit to having politics introduced to this? And now they just keep it going. It's not going to be taken out.
Now, that last comment is interesting. Who had an interest in injecting politics into this? One of the focus group participants said. The injection of politics for personal benefit on this pandemic in the United States was Trump and Republicans. Democrats had no interest in this case in injecting politics. Democrats just wanted to say, let's do what the doctors say. Let's do what the public health experts say. Trump calculated, if I downplay this, if I disagree with the public health experts, it'll go away, and that's best for me. It's better for me politically not to take this seriously, at least publicly. And if it hadn't been that serious, Donald Trump would have been easily reelected. I've said that before. If Trump handled the virus well, he also would have been reelected. But the global handling of the virus actually tells us that the best political strategy is the same as the best medical strategy. You step aside and you listen to doctors. New Zealand did it. Australia did it. Taiwan did it. Rwanda did it. There's other countries as well. The leaders Paul Kagame in Rwanda didn't need to do well. That's a different situation. But you look at New Zealand and other places. When they did well with the virus, they did well politically. And the best way to deal well with the virus was just to do what the doctors said. But these folks believe that it's Democrats who injected politics. Trump made a political call, not a medical call, to say 15 cases will soon be 0. He privately knew how much more serious it was, but he continued to downplay it publicly. It was Trump who initially injected politics. Let's continue.
It's not.
Right.
Nope.
The fear mongering started at the beginning and it's never ended.
Right.
And if there was a point that I want to see the data point that says when we reach herd immunity and what percentage, is there a percentage of the population that could be vaccinated and then we're herd immunity? Because I haven't heard that.
The minute they tell you that, the goalposts will move again, right? Because it was how many days until we're done and we can take off our masks, and 3 weeks until if we all do this, then it'll be over. And we're tired of that. They set it up and then it moves. And so how do you trust that if we all get to vaccination level, we're going to be done with this?
And don't forget the WHO changed the definition of herd immunity from natural to vaccinated. So talk about politicizing science.
Fear mongering. Nearly 600,000 dead officially, probably 750,000 dead if you include unreported or unofficial COVID deaths. What's funny about saying we don't trust anything now because we were told this would be over in 3 weeks, those were the political statements Trump made in 2020. Think about the lack of logic there. They don't trust Biden now. They don't trust the vaccine now. They don't trust the government now. Because Trump said it'll be over by Easter of 2020, when obviously it wasn't going to be over by Easter of 2020. They don't seem to realize that their current mistrust of Biden, who is being honest now about here's what's going well, but it could get worse. And if this isn't going so well, I'm going to tell you, that distrust of Biden is based on things Trump told them that were wrong. Now, this next clip is very interesting. I've guessed that even anti-vaccine Trumpists, once they see there are going to be businesses that say we will require a vaccine, maybe to fly with us, maybe to go to a concert that we organize, whatever, that's going to get more people wanting the vaccine. A bunch of the Trumpists in the focus group do say travel requirements, for example, would push me to get a vaccine. Not all of them, but some. Take a look.
I'm not going to let you board a plane without having a passport, a digital passport that says that you got the COVID-19 vaccine. If that were the case, how many of you on this group, how many of you would get the vaccine? If you knew that you could not get on a plane, okay, so Debbie would.
I would delay it as long as possible.
Yeah.
I wouldn't rush to do it. I would change my travel plans.
Yeah.
Okay, but Lauren, you would do it.
I love to travel. I've been sitting, we haven't traveled. I'm used to going away 3-4 times a year. So if this is the only way I could go away, I'm going to have to take the chance.
Jen, you would get the vaccine. Jen from Iowa, you get the vaccine if it meant that you could travel by flight.
I think eventually I would cave and I would get the vaccine, even though like my husband and I both survived COVID last month. He almost died, but I still think that at some point I might be forced to do it. And I would rather it be my choice than it be forced upon me by other entities.
Debbie, if it meant you not being able to fly or you being able to fly, you would get the vaccine.
I would get the vaccine. We love to travel and we love to take cruises. And so I would get it to travel.
So as you can see, some of them say, no, even to travel, I'm not getting a vaccine. But some of them say, no, I really like to travel. I'd probably get vaccinated if I needed to. A reluctant vaccinated person is still vaccinated. And that's still, I think, the way the focus should remain. One other moment that's interesting, Frank Luntz brought in Dr. Tom Frieden, who's a former CDC director. And Tom Frieden gave the focus group participants 5 facts about vaccines. It actually changed a lot of minds.
Dr. Frieden, I'm going to go to you now because Doug says he wants facts. Let's go. Give him 4 or 5 facts and let's see if you can move them right now.
1, if you get infected with the virus, it will go all over your body and stay there for at least a week and be much more likely to cause you long-term problems than the vaccine. 2, if you get the vaccine, it will prime your immune system, but then the vaccine is gone. It will not be with you anymore. 3, more than 95% of the doctors who've been offered this vaccine have gotten it as soon as they can. 4, the more we vaccinate, the faster we can get back to growing our economy and getting jobs. And 5, if people get vaccinated, we're going to save at least 100,000 lives of Americans who would otherwise be killed by COVID.
Okay, I want a show of hands. How many of you would say that those 5 facts are impactful to you? Raise your hands if they're impactful.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot of you.
So most people raised their hands there. So the upside is not all is lost. Vaccination is continuing to accelerate. We are now officially averaging 2.5 million doses per day, hopefully going to 3. We'll have a full report on that tomorrow. But enough of these folks are suffering the effects of such aggressive disinformation and confusion and partisanship that mathematically we're probably still up against a pretty difficult situation in terms of getting to herd immunity on a national level. In areas with less vaccine hesitancy, it does seem like herd immunity is going to be achievable. But we're going to have to hope that travel restrictions or whatever do push more of these folks to ultimately get the vaccine. We'll have more on this on the David Pakman Show Instagram. Find us there at David Pakman Show. The number one funding source for the David Pakman Show has been and continues to be membership. And membership is not just a feel-good thing. You get access to the world-famous bonus show every single day just for members, as well as commercial-free audio and video feeds of the show day in and day out. You can sign up for membership very, very quickly at joinpakman.com. That's joinpakman.com. If the normal prices strike you as high, by all means, use the coupon code BETTER21, all one word, all lowercase. Become a member today. One of the things we talked about after 0.0 Republicans in the House or Senate voted for Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill was, will these Republican elected officials who voted against the bill that even many Republican voters wanted? The COVID relief bill, remember, had about 70% support. You don't get that with just Democrats. That means independents and Republicans as well. We wondered, will any of these Republican elected officials suffer consequences as a result of voting against that bill? And we quickly saw, even though they all voted against it, some Republicans publicly taking credit for the fact that the bill was passed and actually saying it's good that people are getting this or that or the other thing. It's actually even worse than this. A new poll finds that a third of Republican voters believe that Republican lawmakers did vote for the COVID relief bill. Remember, nobody in the not a single Republican in the House voted in favor of the COVID relief bill a couple of weeks ago. Not a single Republican in the Senate voted in favor of the COVID relief bill. One guy in the Senate was missing. He didn't vote one way or the other. Not a single one. And yet Data for Progress and Vox conducted a poll of Republican voters, and 53% knew that their Republican lawmakers did not vote for the bill. But 31% said, yeah, they did vote for the bill, and 17% didn't know. That means that 48% of Republicans either wrongly believed that their elected officials voted for the $1,400 stimulus checks that most of them are getting, or simply didn't know one way or the other. Now, you might say, well, this is probably a problem on the left as well. It is, but only to a fraction of a degree. Just 16% of Democratic voters thought Republicans voted in favor of it. Just 16% of independent voters thought Republicans voted in favor of the COVID relief bill. So what you have here, if the question you're trying to answer is, will there be repercussions for Republicans for voting against it? The answer is probably not. Number one, because the opportunity for repercussions is still almost 2 years away in the 2022 election. And number two, because a whole bunch of these Republicans think that their elected officials did vote in favor of the bill. And this is exactly why I said there may not be that much of a political risk to these Republicans for voting against, because their constituents still get the money, even though they voted against. When it's convenient, they can say, I oppose the wasteful spending on fill in the blank. And then they can still get themselves reelected because their voters are completely clueless. Now, as far as the voters go, is this surprising? Not really. If you're able to be bamboozled into thinking Donald Trump can fix trade, immigration, health insurance, income inequality, wages, I mean, if you got tricked into that, then I could understand how you would wrongly believe Republican senators and members of the House voted for a bill they didn't vote for. If you fell for Trump saying the virus is just the flu and 15 cases will be zero and the COVID vaccine could give you COVID and masks are bad and don't work and a reflection of suppression of freedom and all of this other stuff as 500,000 people die. If you can fall for that stuff, it's pretty plausible to believe that you will just wrongly assess whether your representative voted for or against the COVID relief bill. That's not really surprising. If you fell for Biden's a socialist, if Biden takes over, we're going to have toilets you have to flush 15 times and no windows and no heat and no air conditioning and it's all going to be socialism and communism. If you fell for that, this is like child's play. This is like nothing. So, of course, right wingers, mostly about 50-50, they wanted the stimulus. Most of them got it, of course, since most of the country qualified for the $1,400 checks. They gladly accepted the free money that counts as socialism when they're hearing about the things that Joe Biden is going to do. And in the end, many of them, a third of them, and close to half if you include the ones who don't know, think that their elected officials who tried to prevent them from getting the money actually helped them get it. It's absolutely stunning stuff. And as I've said before, when you don't even have an agreement as to not what the facts are, but what facts are, meaning what is a fact and what is an opinion. When you don't even have agreement there and understanding on that, people will fall for anything. And that explains Donald Trump, and it explains so much of what we've seen over the last 5 years. In thinking about the future of the Republican Party, we've talked about, is the future a return to the sort of McCain-Romney wing of the Republican Party? Is the future a Trumpian QAnon type dominated Republican Party? Is it a fractured party where someone goes off and takes their toys home, meaning Trump leaves the party and starts his own, or more traditional Republican parties leave the party and start their own? And the answer is we just don't know yet. As we talked about, Donald Trump announcing at a CPAC speech at the end of February that he wants Republicans not to donate to the party, but to donate to his PAC. And he will decide which Republicans to primary because they're bad Republicans. And on the other hand, which Republicans to support, basically because they support Donald Trump. Okay. Speaking on the debut episode of the Lisa Booth show, Donald Trump was interviewed and named names as to who he believes is the future of the Republican Party. And it's mostly just people that suck up to Trump. I don't think it'll be surprising to you to hear that. The people that Donald Trump believes are the future of the Republican Party include Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who from the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic resisted doing anything in Florida, kowtowed to Trump, placated Trump, kept as much open for as long as possible. Trump says Ron DeSantis is part of the future of the Republican Party. Senators Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, and Rand Paul. You'll remember that back in the 2016 Republican primary, Trump and Cruz didn't really get along. Cruz saying some ugly things about Trump. Trump literally implying that Ted Cruz's wife is ugly. So a lot of ugly there. But ultimately, Ted Cruz came around to Donald Trump. Rand Paul, major Trump brown noser, became a friend of Trump's during the campaign, during the presidency, playing golf with Trump. Josh Hawley, arguably the most prominent senator who on January 6th tried to actually prevent the electoral votes from being counted. So we know why they are there. South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem. She has been a big Trump suck up to some degree. Maybe she's on the list because Trump finds her attractive. That's always a possibility with Donald Trump as well. And then, of course, Arkansas Republican gubernatorial candidate Sarah Huckabee Sanders, a massive Trump suck up who has importantly remained loyal after she left the administration. Remember that Sarah Huckabee Sanders was Donald Trump's press secretary for some period of time. So these are the people Trump says are the future. He said, quote, I think we have a lot of people. We have a lot of young, good people. Ron DeSantis is doing a really good job in Florida. Josh Hawley has shown real courage in going after big tech. You know, they go after him. Josh is terrific. Somebody that's been really terrific is Ted Cruz, Trump said. He and I had it out for a while. Actually, we were very close, even during the campaign. And then it got nasty. The press would say, when's the nastiness going to start? I said, don't worry, it'll start. And it got very violent. But he's been great. Essentially meaning eventually Ted Cruz just prayed at the altar of Trump, and then Trump mentioning a few other names and saying he's very confident in the talent pool, calling the Republican Party stacked. So the strategy here is very clear. If Trump can be a successful kingmaker in 2022 and decide who gets primaried and loses, and decide who he backs, who gets reelected. If he can effectively pick the winners and losers in 2022, it better positions him for 2024. He was asked in this interview with Lisa Booth whether and when he will decide about throwing his hat in the ring. He just didn't say anything about it yet. And it seems very, very clear that if Trump fails to control the party in 2022, he's unlikely to run. And I think even if he succeeds, he may not run because he'll just be, older, tired, or bored with the idea by 2024. if Trump successfully runs the 2022 primary, in particular, if the people he chooses help to take control back of the House or Senate from Democrats in 2022, I think at least Trump will be able to make the case that he is still the most powerful figure in the party and may run in 2024. The names on Trump's list, not hugely surprising. Whether Trump will succeed at this in 2022 certainly remains to be seen. The David Pakman Show is audience-supported media, and you can contribute any amount you want on Patreon, as little as $1 per month. Plus, you can get the daily bonus show, world famous at this point, and the daily commercial-free TV show by making those pledges at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. This is audience-supported media. We depend on the support of our viewers and listeners. Whether you listen to the podcast, watch on YouTube, or watch us on TV, or even listen on the radio, patreon.com/David Pakman Show. All right. This is something a little different. You know, I get so many emails, probably like 8 to 10 emails a week from people who either want to start a podcast, YouTube channel, or independent media show, or who have started it, but it's not going as well as they want, and they want advice from me. And it's beyond the scope of the 24 hours that I have in the day to be doing too much of this kind of individual guidance. But there are a bunch of different people over the years that have come to me for advice, people I know personally, or people that are introduced to me, and they often have very similar questions. And the point of failure for almost everybody is exactly the same. And I sort of tweeted about this yesterday, and a bunch of people wrote back and said, you should really kind of talk about this. Being, you know, as not, we're I believe in the top 0.1% of YouTube at this point, and having done it and having gotten to the point of hiring staff and having a successful business model, what is it that causes people to fail? And fortunately or unfortunately, the good, I have good news and bad news, and it's all the same. The biggest single point of failure is essentially not showing up. When I will talk to people who have started shows or want to, they often will jump to things like, how do I negotiate a brand deal? What should my YouTube thumbnails look like? What kind of equipment do I need for my podcast? When can I monetize? And so often the cart is being put before the horse. And what I tell everybody is all of that stuff will come naturally. You'll figure that stuff out when the time comes. Once you are actually steadily and consistently and reliably producing the content. This isn't like the bogus 98% is showing up. This is just the reality that people will often focus on things that aren't the most important. Now, obviously, if your content is terrible, some people just like, they're you know, the content's not good. Assuming that your content isn't terrible, where almost everybody fails is they get discouraged too early. There are overnight successes in independent media. Of course there are. But the vast majority are not. And people will come to me and I'll say, you need to pick a content schedule and stick to it. Are you doing a weekly show? Are you doing daily YouTube clips? Are you doing a twice a week show? What is the format and the timeline that you are committing to? And sometimes people will hear that. And they will keep it going. You know, I remember, in fact, years and years ago, meeting up with Kyle Kulinski when both of our channels were much smaller. And the thing we talked about as we both were looking to grow at the time that he actually did, and he now has a channel that is doing really well, is you've got to commit to the schedule of content. That's actually the key thing. We didn't talk about monetization, brand deals, thumbnails. We talked maybe about, you know, what microphone do you use, but it was all about the content. And so I'll have conversations with people and 90% of the conversation is about things that don't really make a difference. And then they'll say, yeah, I'm going to do the content. 6 months go by. I'll come across their YouTube channel and it'll say, oh, their latest video is 6 weeks old. You've done no content for 6 weeks. And sometimes we'll have another interaction and they'll say, yeah, you know, it just wasn't as lucrative as I wanted it to be. It's like, well, but you're not publishing the content. You have to do that first. The other big mistake is sometimes just scaling up expenses before it's time. I know of shows that are 1/10 the size of our show where the host will tell me they already have an executive assistant who responds to their email and schedules their interviews. What? That doesn't make any sense. And from a business standpoint, I've talked before about the pushcart method. One of my MBA professors would talk about the pushcart method. Don't necessarily go to a restaurant with an expensive lease and tons of employees. Try the food with a pushcart, a food cart. And if it does well, then you roll that into maybe getting the restaurant. And this is like the most important thing that I tell people. And most of them fail to do it. And there are tons of shows that could do fine. The content's good, but people just don't show up. And so, unfortunately, I at this point am unable to provide individualized advice to all the people who email me. But if you're not doing the content, don't be surprised that none of the other stuff is going as well as you want it to go. Hopefully that's useful to some people. And I think that that's what we committed to early with the show, which was when we were twice a week and we were doing the content and we were putting up the clips in the podcast episodes. When we went to, when that was supported financially, we then went to 4 times a week and we did it. And then when that was supported financially, we went to the 5, and people can count on the content. It's the most important thing. It's the biggest point of failure. And the real reason why tons of people, I mean, it's dozens and dozens of people over time who have emailed me saying, I want to do what you're doing, but it's just not happening. You didn't do the main thing I said, which is commit to the content schedule. I used to watch Jeopardy when I was younger, but I admit it's been decades since I've really watched Jeopardy. But one of the big things about Jeopardy under the tutelage of the great Alex Trebek was that it was just about facts and empiricism. That's what it was about. And unfortunately, that's the exact opposite of pseudoscience pushing Dr. Mehmet Oz. Mehmet Oz is like a TV. He's a real doctor. He's a real doctor, but he's also, like a TV doctor who appears on different shows, often giving medical advice. And after the passing of longtime Jeopardy host Alex Trebek, Jeopardy has tried a number of different guest hosts. And this week, or for a 2-week period, actually, the guest host is Dr. Mehmet Oz. To me, this is pathetically embarrassing. It's to put in front of for a show that is supposed to be about just the facts and empiricism, to put in a guy who for years has been peddling all sorts of quackery and pseudoscience seems completely antithetical to what Jeopardy is about. I don't really care in the sense that I don't even watch this show, but there are tons of Jeopardy fans who are absolutely furious about this. And I have to tell you, I actually get it. Why do you put on a pseudoscience doctor to host a show about facts? Dr. Oz has previously pushed various weight loss products, including a green coffee extract, which is completely and utterly not based in any kind of science whatsoever. And in fact, even the claims that the company based their marketing on have since been retracted. Dr. Oz has pushed the idea that GMOs are unhealthy. Now, I know this is unpopular with some on the left. There is no scientific evidence that GMOs are unhealthy by virtue of being GMOs. Yes, there is overlap between GMOs and pesticides, and there are all sorts of deleterious effects associated with pesticides, but there is not evidence that GMOs are unhealthy. I know some of you will get mad and say, David, but that's not been studied. It has been studied. Go to scholar.google.com and find endless peer-reviewed, even long-term studies on GMOs. Dr. Oz has pushed cures for the common cold, including something called umcalaubo root extract. There is no science to back that up. It can have side effects, and Dr. Oz has pushed it. Dr. Oz has talked about cures for restless leg syndrome, which include putting lavender soap under your bed sheets because the floral smell may be relaxing. No scientific research supports that claim. He's talked about, do-it-yourself teeth whitening methods that involve strawberries. this is not who should be hosting Jeopardy. And I'm not arguing for anybody to be canceled. I don't even care what Jeopardy does. They can do whatever they want. But it seems like, we actually have a show here based on empirical knowledge and facts. And you bring on Dr. Oz. I don't like it. You tell me if you think I'm right or if I'm wrong or if it just doesn't really matter. And I shouldn't even be talking about it on the David Pakman Show. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here is a comment about the recent mass shootings and Joe Biden.
Hey, David, Jerry calling from San Antonio.
Right.
I was just curious, how long do you think it'll be before the 21-year-old Syrian-born shooter, a mass shooter in Colorado who killed 10 people, will be blamed on Joe Biden's airstrikes in Syria?
I haven't heard it blamed on Biden's Syrian airstrikes yet. Doesn't mean it won't be. But I have already seen Biden wanting to take guns is responsible for the shootings. And maybe I'm too stupid. Maybe the problem is me. I didn't understand the connection, but I saw that Biden's anti-gun agenda is to blame for the shootings. Also, so right-wing media already was undercovering the shooting in Georgia because it was a white perpetrator who killed Asian people. A lot of the right-wing networks ignored that altogether or barely mentioned it. Now that we know the shooter in Colorado is Muslim, right-wing networks are going absolutely, completely bonkers, falling over themselves to talk about that while still barely mentioning the one from just days before. So everybody is doing exactly what we would expect them to do. Maybe the Syrian airstrikes will be pointed to as the reason why this shooting took place, although I haven't heard it yet. We have a great bonus show for you today. Oakland is launching a guaranteed pay plan for low-income people. Very interesting idea. The South Dakota governor is trying to block trans athletes from women's sports, not just in South Dakota, but nationally. How? We'll explain it. And unfortunately, roads are getting deadlier for pedestrians. It's not just drivers who are seeing an increased rate of fatalities over the last year. It is also pedestrians, and we will talk about that on today's bonus show as well. How do you get the bonus show? Really easy. Go to joinpakman.com and sign up. That's it. Go to joinpakman.com and sign up. You'll get instant access to the membership benefits, which include commercial-free audio and video streams of the show, as well as the daily bonus show. You can use the coupon code BETTER21 if you want a discount. Don't feel obligated. And you can also get bonus show access by becoming a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. I will see you then. We're back tomorrow. We're back Friday. Then we are off for a week. Just a reminder, we'll be off next week. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman.